Hi folks, and welcome back. It is that time of the month again, and I have another awesome dev joining me, the man himself, senior game designer, Corey Ceythos LeFever. If you guys could make him feel nice and welcome.
Hey everybody, glad to be here. Thanks for the great questions and for your interest in crafting and harvesting and anything else we might be talking about.
Absolutely. Lots of crafting and harvesting enthusiasts in here. I can see a couple chomping at the bit right now to get their questions out or have them answered. Very impatient. So we will not keep them waiting any longer. So we'll jump straight in. Same as every roundtable. We're not going to mention names, but we will just read out from the forums the questions from the community and do our best to answer them. We'll start off with a good one here. Will crafted items and or the components have levels of quality? Thinking in lines of Star Wars Galaxy resource quality system, such as you may make a Batwing Crunchy from a newbie zone bat at no stats, but at a high level bat may yield an agility bonus to the final product, while skills and tools in cooking could also yield a bonus in the final product. Would we have anything like that?
Yeah, let me dive in a little bit on that. Components may end up having a quality which would allow them to provide a bonus to a finished product's progress, right, when you start the crafting session. Finished products themselves will follow a similar creation process to the components, like whatever you do to make the base components to be the same general process you'll be doing for the finished items. But you'll care about the quality of a finished item only insofar as it determines if you get the desired item from the crafting session or if you fail. We're considering adding a small chance that you can receive a free upgrade from the process. I'll talk about this a little further down in some of the other questions. But the example, instead of like making a Batwing Crunchy in that example to add an agility bonus, the agility bonus would be slightly higher, and the duration of the food would be longer per item. Yeah, so we would just have like the bonuses kind of baked into the item and the item identity, as opposed to, you know, I use this thing and I make a Batwing Crunchy with agility, or I make a Batwing Crunchy without agility. We're pretty sticking to like an item is very much kind of expected from one item to the next, but we'll delve into the specifics a little further down.
Gotcha, okay. All right, so we've got a couple of really good ones here that are probably a little bit in depth, but we'll go over as much as we can. So it's a couple of questions in one. General design philosophy and vision. I've talked a lot about the vision for Pantheon to have a robust and compelling adventuring game where players aren't simply always chasing after the next question or dungeon. When it comes to the crafting side of the game, is there a similar vision that you can share with the community?
Yeah, I mean, the general goal is that Pantheon will have a fairly deep and rewarding experience on the crafting side. Beyond just chasing like the next recipe or the next skill point, I'd really like to see crafters be able to contribute to the world at large. For example, imagine like provisioners meeting up at a tavern and having a cooking party. With enough participation, a nearby table or counter might spawn a feast that people passing by could interact with for a buff. Similarly, imagine like a scenario where alchemists might gather an apothecary and whip up some potions. A nearby cauldron or flask rack might have a random or fixed potion or poison effect that, you know, passers-by could consume to see if they are lucky or not. But you know, it's kind of a hazard when you're reaching into unknown stuff, I suppose. Another type of crafting related event I'd like to see is allowing crafters to like complete certain types of writs to buff NPCs in the surrounding area. Completion of enough of the appropriate blacksmithing writ, for example, might give nearby guards better armor for a while, or completion enough woodworking writs might give nearby archers better arrows for a period of time. I'd also like to see crafters able to influence vendor supplies through quests or writ completions. For example, enough of the appropriate stonemasonry writ might spawn a limited supply of gems, ores, and related crafting materials to nearby vendors that sell those kinds of things.
That's awesome, man. I really like that. Where people can actually affect the world around them, and yeah, especially like cooking, you know, putting up a table or a plate full of, you know, whatever, and have passers-by coming to the tavern, talking, socialising, being able to grab a food buff or some food for their adventure. Sounds really good.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's just really important that beyond also, you know, just like the grind to get to like the end of the progression, that, it's really important if we're making a living, kind of breathing world where we want people to be immersed and kind of have a stake in what's going on, that we give them meaningful ways to kind of, feed into that. It's not really just so much about like what you can create, but what can you do with your skills.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's important. So when it comes to items, how will crafted items be distinguished from looted items so that they're both equally desirable to players? And I know this is a huge problem in a lot of games that a lot of other companies have had trouble kind of balancing. So how are we going to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to the team that items have and largely retain their own identity. Like both categories of items will provide unique items that can only be found either by looting them or crafting them, or looting them parts of them first and crafting them. Rather than looking at how they can compete with one another, I'd rather see it as how they can complement one another. There's a few ways we might achieve this. Simplest way is through like alteration of an existing item to gain a new item with its own identity. Some examples might be like taking Eridune's flaming sword from a lengthy and difficult adventuring quest chain. There might be a recipe or crafting method to transmute those stats and the effects into Eridune's thundering blade or Eridune's freezing cutlass. Another example might be like a crafted robe. Robe of the Last Magi, just pulling stuff out of my bum here, but might be a powerful item with its own hefty stats and a passive mana regen effect or something to that effect. It might be tradable to a wandering or summoned spirit from bygone age, giving players the opportunity to receive a war wizard's drape in exchange with its own unique stats and a passive spell damage effect, or something on par in relative power to the crafted robe. Providing opportunities in adventuring related quests to have crafting alternates, like quest completion conditions and vice versa, would be another way we can sort of have them coexist and complement each other. Having an upgrade path for adventuring related items through crafting, allowing players to increase existing stats and potency of existing effects on an item by a fixed percentage. So you're going to get that sweet raid loot, Sword of Dragon Slaying, and you want to have 5% more potency on the existing stats, and maybe it's got like a Dragon Bane DD effect that only affects dragons, and you could increase the damage by a fixed percent as well through the upgrade path. It covers a lot of the professions with equipable slots. It doesn't really cover so much like alchemy and provisioning, so I kind of imagine the way that plays out is slightly improved potency from the consumables, like if it's a heal effect or a buff effect of some sort, like you would see that, see a similar increase. Improved effect durations in the upgrades, so if it was a 10-minute buff from a potion, it might instead be like a 12-minute buff. Possibly even allowing like for group consumption in the case of like an upgraded like alchemy recipe or provisioning recipe might be able to put down like a keg or a feast, or in alchemy's case like a cauldron or flask pot people can reach into.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That sounds awesome.
I understand like people are very strongly in two camps a lot of times, with like only the best stuff should ever come from adventuring, or only the best stuff should come from crafting. I think we can really play to both, and the systems will probably be at best when they just work together.
That's right. You can blur the lines and still win on both sides. It's just how we go about doing it. But that sounds really good. All right, so gathering, which kind of includes salvaging and scavenging to a degree. In Ceythos' TwitchCon interview, we heard a lot about the concept of resource scarcity and how gathering nodes would not be as common as other games we might be used to. What might this mean for the player who really enjoys gathering resources? And I'll probably use an example like Vanguard, where you could just run around. Hitting one node would open up a chain of nodes, and if you went to the right ones in correct order, you could kind of get a loop down pat and just keep kind of harvesting. If that's not the case, like how would we deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think some patterns are going to emerge because, computers are kind of bad at randomization to begin with. But I think the person that really enjoys gathering in our game will still be happy with our approach. When I'm speaking of node scarcity, what I'm talking about is finding a balance where players will be actively hunting for resources rather than running the same predictable loop, to get the same like 24 nodes every 3 minutes, like we've seen in other games. Ultimately, I want players to feel great about finding a node without tripping over them. We'll be relying very heavily on like server logging and player feedback to make sure we hit the right balance between feeling starved and feeling slightly hungry when it comes to finding nodes. With that said, it will also be important that recipes not require mounds of harvested items to make a single finished product, or that crafting components and like finished items yield a healthy amount of crafting EXP per craft. if we're working with a paradigm that finding materials is going to be, we're going to be on the hungry side of finding them. We've definitely got our work cut out for finding the right balance, but I'm pretty certain with good data and feedback, we can find it. Long term, I'd like to explore the possibility of using harvesting specific abilities on nodes potentially. So instead of just going up and right-clicking on them, you might use Miner's Precision or something to study and strike an ore vein with the intent to try and target a higher rarity yield, or using Skinner's Deftness to skin an animal quicker at the risk of a potentially lower yield. Kind of a little variance, kind of let people choose how fast do I want to do it, how efficient do I want to do it, how targeted do I want to do it. But that would be a little out of scope right now for what we're doing. Again, a long-term goal, perhaps.
Yeah, that's awesome. They also heard about gathering resources would be seeded by geography, where some map regions may be richer in certain resource types than others. So can we share a little bit more how that might work?
Sure. It's certain climates may only grow certain types of plants for provisioning or alchemy, for example. Those are, I think, pretty easy examples to think of. Plants only grow in specific places. Visiting a farm in Thronefast could be wildly different than, say, going to a grove in Fairthale to look for ingredients. The types of flowers, the fungi, the roots, they're all different from one another. So there have to be some care that there's enough ingredients to start crafters on their journeys in each respective starting area. It's not realistic to ask players at level 1 to see 2 or more zones just to even start beginning crafting meaningfully. Geographical seeding may mean, in terms of comparing 2 iron mines in different locations, one mine might have level 20-ish bandits holed up in them, and another might have level 40-ish orcs in the area. In the bandits' mine, iron comes from ore veins, and the iron goods in their possession are standard iron. In the orcs' mine, iron still comes from the iron veins as expected, but they've got a special way maybe of tempering their iron goods. We'll just call it blood iron as an example. Salvaging blood iron could yield blood iron scraps or components, regular iron scraps or components, or whatever agents they use in the tempering process. This also points to reuse of seemingly simple materials along the horizontal and vertical progression of crafting, which should help keep some of the more humble resources in demand. Encountering some of the more basic material types in areas where higher level adventuring content takes place might also provide higher yields. So if I'm finding moon orchids in a level 40 area, it might give 2 to 3 times the yield that finding it in a level 10 area would, since typically the higher level areas are going to have more difficulties around them, whether it's asking people to traverse long distances or remote places filled with climates or higher level hostile NPCs and stuff.
That is awesome, man. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Like I said, it's going to be a delicate balance, and I don't know. I think that kind of goes back to the player versus environment and using the world as part of the narrative experience and immersing people. And I think it's just kind of weird when you're like, okay, suddenly this is this level, now only these things are ever found.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so moving on to the crafting process. Can you provide a general overview of how the process will work when crafting a crafted item? Will it simply be a matter of combining materials and components, or will it be more of an interactive process where the crafter has to do the right things at the right time in order to advance the item to completion?
Yeah, I guess I'll slow down here. It seems I'm talking a little fast for some folks. We're eventually going to have a more interactive process with the potential for unexpected events, either for or against the crafter session that they'll have to react to. If you're familiar with Vanguard, it's kind of like complications. They could be in your favor, they could be against you.
Yeah.
There's a few ways we can tackle it that we'll be vetting once Project Fairthale is in everyone's hands. The current version and the one that VIPs will likely experience first for crafting is just a simple combine process. The current UI will allow for us to expand into the next iteration, and having a simple combine process to start allows us to explore how we want to tackle recipes and rewards while we make the crafting itself, that experience, better.
Yeah, that's nice, mate. Good approach.
We did try a more strictly ability-driven approach initially. The feedback internally was that it felt a little too much like playing the numbers and playing a spreadsheet. So we'll see. We may revisit that as part of the exploration process. There was a fair amount of work done there, but it just so far hadn't really played out to be fun in actuality. It's one of those unfortunate things about design. You feel like, oh, this might be the right path, and
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not always the case when you start putting the rubber to the road.
Yeah, that's it. Are there any plans to allow crafted items to be customized during the creation? For example, will you be able to modify results, the resulting item's stats or appearance? Like, same with kind of Vanguard, how we're able to add things in to put a +2 or +3 or something on.
Yeah, I guess this is a little hard maybe to illustrate. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but at this time we're not really like exploring the ability to kind of like freeform or choose your own stats method. Finished items can be requirements in new items, for example, but you won't be able to select like I'm just sitting down with a blank template and I want to choose this much strength, this much dex at the cost of maybe like this much stamina to get exactly the stats you want on like an iron longsword. Instead, you might take like a mithril longsword and combine it with other materials to get an alternate version with its own like unique identity to it. We may allow space to research like new minor passive effects or adding enchantment or gem slots and the like to augment items, but fundamentally, like the items that you make are going to be the items they make with their own like predetermined stats. I know that's kind of a bummer maybe for some people to hear that, and I definitely like understand and feel that frustration. But I think something like that works in a more like purely crafting driven game. And at the end of the day, we're also heavily on the adventuring side, and we're not relying as like one of our sort of like pillars of design, and part of like our the experience we're going back to has a lot of space for looted items, also kind of giving those like moments of like instant upgrades and aha moments. So sorry, a little long-winded there, but
No, that's
yeah,
good,
I don't think like a fully customizable approach as a design feature in itself is bad. Just I don't know that it's necessarily for the type of product that we're trying to make, unfortunately. We want sweet loot to come from defeated enemies as one of our goals, so having a fully flexible like build your own approach probably isn't right.
That's right. You could just
when it's
stack
when the game's a success though, and maybe our studio gets bigger, maybe something that's completely crafting driven where a similar system would fit better could emerge in like game 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. All right, so moving on to progression, crafting progression. Will crafters need special tools or equipment to craft items? Will there be an equipment progression to crafting, just like there is for adventuring, or will crafting equipment be more limited? So I think we're talking about, again, maybe like Vanguard, so like, your novice, your beginner, your advanced, whatever, your master crafter, clothes, weapons.
Yeah, that was a really good experience. Like, it was really nice to be able to have like a gameplay path that for crafters, and have that kind of chase for them to be able to get unique like jewelry and unique like aprons and things like that with all manner of pockets and benefits and doodads. Like I really liked chasing that as a player. We currently don't have a plan for it like in the current pipeline iteration for crafting. I would like to see that as a long-term goal, again, because I really liked that experience as a player, and I think like as a designer it's good to be able to not always have to like award people with a new recipe every time they finish a quest, or have to chase the just down like skill point progression purely. So I'm hoping we can get there one day, but as it stands now, we can also have some special requirements for crafting. So if we wanted to, say, have like a specific tool as part of a recipe that could be consumed or not in the process, like we have the design and like implementation space for that right now. So I would expect that appears throughout parts of the progression.
Yeah, nice. So buying and selling in the game economy. In previous statements by the dev team, it's been strongly hinted that the game will have regional markets. Can we provide a basic overview of the different ways that player can buy or sell items? We could probably touch on this a little bit, but probably not in full detail.
Sure. I can't say that we've really invented the wheel like right now as it stands. It's pretty basic in terms of how players can buy or sell items. It's the peer-to-peer trading into NPCs, and possibly soon on a regional auction house. When we say regional, I imagine Brad's kind of envisioning like continental markets. But one of my other duties when I'm not working on something crafting or harvesting related is to like research and pitch economy focused design elements. One of the things I'm kind of like trying to suss out right now is whether ditching an auction house in the traditional sense, even if region locked, might be a good move for us, and instead like move towards something akin to like singular brokers that guilds could like rent merchant space effectively and have them consign goods to other players. I have to work out like a scaling and tiered schema for like recurring rents and thinking about like what it would cost to be in particular locations, areas that we anticipate are going to have a lot of flow traffic versus places that aren't going to have as much foot traffic. But anyway, like people could search individual merchants for items, and there'd be UI support to make finding items faster, like its own mini auction house. Another thing that I would like to maybe consider is soft encouraging players to sell their unwanted items to merchants that would be most interested in the particular category of the item being sold. So if a player has some jewelry, for example, that they want to sell, they could take it to a jewelry merchant and they'd get the full price of the item's sell value. But maybe that jewelry merchant is in the middle of a nearby capital, and rather than travel there, our sample adventurer wants instead to like go to the city gates or a nearby outpost and to sell to a general merchant instead. Time's money after all, right? Any other merchant other than the jeweler in this case might only offer like 80% of the sale value of the items in question. If we encourage players to sell their items to the most relevant vendors, they're in a way helping like restock the merchants with appropriate category of items some of the time. If it's successful in encouraging that player behavior, vendor divers will have a better experience finding the category of item they're after. Unless you're like me and you just like the thrill of the treasure hunt, so you're going to look at all the merchants anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
There's a little bit of an info dump for you.
That's awesome. Good stuff, man. All right, so moving on to the next question, and this is a pretty serious one, pretty heavy topic. So who is Corey's favourite ogre?
There's only one right answer, and it's Shrek.
So that was from a dorky. Of course, you had to get one in.
Of course.
So moving on. Actually, that was a follow-up to the Shrek one. This may fit into the first question, but how will one level up as a crafter? Will it be through creating multiple items, completing quests and or writs, some combination of them all, or something else entirely? So how would that leveling system or getting better, the progression kind of work in contrast to adventuring, say?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fairly similar. Combination of item creation grind, completion of writs and quests, and possibly server or zone-wide crafting events. I mean, like, why should adventurers have all the fun, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Why not? Spread it out, share the love.
Heck yeah.
All right, so with the harvesting system, have we considered that MMOs have become more solo-orientated when thinking about the implementation of the harvesting system? And what do we think about harvest system with more social aspects in it rather than individual? I think we're building a social MMO, so we're coming back to those roots where we want teamwork, we want, socializing, we want people to want to talk to each other and group up and help. So I think hopefully we're turning that back around to make an MMO actually a massively multiplayer online game again. But
we are? We do?
I hope so. So
no, totally.
Where do we stand on that?
No, I hear what they're saying. I don't think we fundamentally have an issue with providing like social opportunities where we can, especially with harvesting and possibly even crafting as well. Where we run into some issues is if grouping up provides the most rewarding yields, and it sort of becomes the best, or in some people's perception, the only way to harvest, and it could greatly widen the funnel for like the amount of items that are hitting the economy. Like when we saw, in Vanguard, and you had your group ups, it exponentially increased the amount of harvested materials everyone received.
And the potential for rares increased. That was really handy.
Yeah, and it's cool. It has its own, again, kind of like economy implications. Ikic, or Wyman, had suggested recently that he had an idea that might gain some traction. Players might be able to group up and harvest, allowing them to combine their skill levels to harvest nodes well above like their individual skill level. In fact, it could be like a requirement at times. So the perceived end game of the current content players might need to come together to harvest some really crazy like meteorite or something that struck the planet.
That's cool.
In this case, yeah, we could have yields that adhere to the loot rules that are currently in place for grouping, rather than adding like extra items to the yield. It could be round robin, master loot, randomized, whatever. Combining skill values might be nice, since we've already talked about having nodes placed geographically rather than along like forced level adherence as well. So, you might be in a level 10 area, and maybe you see some nodes that are well above like what your current skill threshold would be, and you're able to access that, whether through cunning or cowardice, like sneaking behind a group that's clearing the area, whatever it happens to be. Gotta love that open world social experience. But you stumble on a node that you yourself couldn't like on your own harvest, because that area happens to have iron or mithril or whatever it happens to be, or some higher level tree. Call in your friends, go harvest it, have at it. I think that could be a good experience, but again, we got to get the core experience has to be good and solid first before we can really explore too hard on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've covered that. So a system where players would welcome other players to mine the same mining nodes. So I think we kind of covered that as well. We can kind of do ones where we kind of share group, solo.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll move on. Will there be a team harvesting bonus implemented? We kind of covered that as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really see one being implemented at this time. Like, if in testing, if we've got some good server logs to kind of see the velocity of harvesting items in to the harvesting items out, that may prove whether we eventually consider it. Again, I'm not anti-socializing. I just don't want to end up like blowing the economy up before we can see things in action. Prototyping or small scale testing or using bots to prove out parts of the economy are tools that are going to help us initially, but like we all know, what is it? Plans only survive until contact with the enemy, or however that quote goes.
That's it, exactly.
So until we see what the actual player behavior is, I'd like to err on the side of caution. I wouldn't be above considering teaming up to combine maybe in some fashion if we can fit it in, but I just don't see the like extra yield applying in this case.
Yeah, that's fair. So are there any plans to have seasonal or day-night abundance or scarcity of items planned for harvesting?
Okay. The short answer is yes. I'd also like to piggyback onto that like any of our live or time-limited events, I can talk today. So certain harvesting items might only be available while like those events are active. Those harvesting items would likely play only into the recipes learned from the same event that they're associated with. I don't want to delve too deeply into that right now. Like that could be its own probably like half roundtable discussion at some point down the road. But
yeah, nice.
I'd also like to add that multicolor mana might be a factor as well for some more regularly available crafts.
Ah, there you go. Half a bean. Give them a bit of a tease.
Gotta give them a little flavor, right?
So will season or acclimation have an effect on the availability or scarcity of certain harvesting items? So it kind of follows up on the same thing, but will the acclimation system or seasons have an effect on that?
I mean, basically, yes. Acclimation. Sorry, I just tabbed out on something here.
We just did season, but it's kind of a season / acclimation.
So I touched on this briefly with the previous answer, but acclimation may be required to reach like certain types of nodes or to reach certain crafting stations for specific recipes. The Forge and Amber Fate is an example of this that we've kind of already pegged as maybe like a test case. Parts of the zone require frigid acclimation. We've seen that in practice. And the Forge area itself is probably going to eventually require scorching acclimation unless Joppa's changed his plans there. But yeah, so in other words, like to kind of traverse the area, you might need frigid, but then once you get there, like surprise, you want to craft, you're going to need scorching.
Yeah, nice. So how will the system be broken up? Like primary, secondary, professions, gathering? Do we have a list of what's available currently and how we're going to go with that?
So this is a bit of a bigger topic, but I'm happy to tackle this. Where did we see that one? Yeah, the current plan was to allow crafters to choose one of 6 professions and one of 2 specializations per each profession. We had it in place that you'd be able to like drop a profession if you wanted to, or drop a specialization at a cost of some of the progress that you'd made in that path. And if you wanted to restart in another profession, like let's say I was a blacksmith and I did armor smithing for a good while, and I either decided like my guild needed me to swap professions, or maybe some new recipes had come out and I'm really excited about that and I want to jump over there for a bit. I could dump that progress to a degree and go start fresh in a new profession. And then if I later had buyer's remorse, I could go back and I'd have retained a certain percentage of that. So if I go back to being a blacksmith, as long as I have the necessary skill level still, or reclimbed that, I'd be able to access the same recipes that I'd already unlocked. We want to allow for a little bit of fluidity, I think, in that case, but there's a possibility we might actually move to a more free-form crafting progression where that paradigm may no longer hold. It's going to just depend on how it's going to depend on a few things, but the idea there would be more of a point-buy system if we move to that, where kind of like alternate advancement points, so you could kind of purchase your way through what skills you want to work on.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, in that reality, being able to maximize one full line, for example, would come at a particular rate, and then moving beyond that would have ever increasing difficulty and time sinks associated with that. So
yeah.
In saying all that, I've actually done a little bit of exploration on this. If we were to consider that, then it even becomes that much more important that we have social opportunities for crafting, because when it goes from, hey, I'm looking for a blacksmith of this skill that also happens to be a weaponsmith of this skill level for this particular thing, to I just need a blacksmith that has maybe this particular recipe, or they've progressed this far. When suddenly everybody can do that, you have to find ways, I think, that you can have social opportunities for people to showcase individual facets of what they've unlocked. So instead of the situation of looking for armor smith with this pattern, I'm looking for blacksmith to join on this event to do this thing. Anyway, I'm not going to go too much further down the rabbit hole on that right now, because I said, this could be its own complete thing, but this is just kind of full kimono, some of the things we're considering.
I like it. That sounds good, man. Being a crafter myself, that's exciting. Opens up a world of possibilities.
Yes, it was funny. The biggest, I would say, I guess, piece of feedback that I got from when we first started laying out the plans semi-publicly was that, everyone's like, well, we'll just make alts. We'll just, whatever. This is artificial limitations. I hear that, and I certainly understand that. Where my mind was at when we originally sort of sat down to concept crafting and trying to provide as a deep and rewarding system, my mind went to let's start with how can we as closely mirror the adventuring experience as possible by choosing your role, choosing what you bring to the table. I don't think it's inherently wrong, but there's pros, there's cons. Internally, it seemed like that was maybe one of the bigger sticking points, and externally, it seemed like it was a bigger sticking point. So, yeah, we're considering, but we ultimately have to make whatever is going to be the best product that we can do with the resources that we have. And when I say best product, I mean what's going to serve our audience best. So
yeah, absolutely, man. All right, so a couple of those other ones were incorporated into our answer, so I might skip on to the next person just in the interest of time.
Sure.
So the post just under that, will there be a point either at or above the optimal skill point for a given item that it effectively has a failure rate of 0?
So there has to be some risk to crafting as well. I don't really foresee recipes ever being mathematically solved to the point of negating full risk. In most failure cases, we're forecasting the removal of fuels at the very minimum that were used in a crafting session, and depending on the rarity of the materials involved and your skill levels and stuff, that might affect what percentage of the materials you get back. But I don't ever see failure rate ever be completely out of the equation. Yeah,
that's good, man. You got to have some risk.
Yeah,
Makes it all that more worthwhile when you do succeed. Right,
We also don't want to be like so punitive. If I can just piggyback on that a little bit for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
That like one of the things that I felt with some of the games that I've played in the past when it came to crafting and harvesting, you'd spend hours harvesting, you'd go craft, and then like you might have 2 items to show for it at the end, and like that doesn't feel good.
And a risk of failing one of them or having nothing.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
cool. Or I spent all this time, like like in some of the earlier games, like spent all this time farming these items for money, and then I go to the vendor and I blow my savings in an hour, and I maybe got 5 skill ups, and I have no items to show for it. Like that,
Yeah,
that also doesn't feel.
that's it. It's going more on that grind. All right, so to what degree are higher tier items going to incorporate one or more lower tier sub-components from the same trade skill line?
Okay. Yeah, that's being planned for, but what actual percentages it ends up being is still to be determined. Beyond the level 20 to 25 range, though, in a crafter's progression, you can expect more callbacks to previous materials or components that you'd worked with earlier. I want to leave us some room until players have had their hands on the more basic recipes to like firmly determine what the percentages like play out as being a good balance there. But I certainly want the materials that you're interacting with from like out the gate to have periodic callbacks further up the like horizontal, or sorry, the vertical progression.
Nice. And these two are kind of together. Will there be opportunities to do large batch production of trivial items? Like I think in Vanguard you could do 100 of the easiest kind of wood if you were a few levels above that and an experienced crafter. And can production be queued so that you don't need to perform some stupidly high amount of clicking? So will any of it be automated, or will there be a process to kind of help break that down and do large amounts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine that we would allow for some batch production. We'd want to try to remove some of the tedium from the system where it makes sense. It may require like recipe use to discover the techniques to batch create, or a quest line or something similar to unlock that functionality. In the current like simple combined form that we have in, you can auto create. I don't see that staying long term though. Where I'd lean into it is increasing the speed of crafting with easier recipes, so like leveraging your skills, providing more oomph in your sessions. For example, like if an action adds X value progress to the session, having a higher level skill, and by skill I mean like my blacksmithing skill value is higher, that might provide Y value additional progress to the session, for example. Allowing for the aforementioned batching would also help cut down on tedium, and that could kind of see some play out with the point by like progression perks that I mentioned earlier as well. It could be that that allows you to make things that in greater quantities. I'm not a fan in general of anything that can be completely automated, though. I think that has a tendency to take me out of the games I'm playing when I can do that, and I think that's a little like antithesis to the product we're making as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Are we considering putting some trade skill stations out in the wild, down in some dungeon where a given recipe would require the use of that specific stage? I think this is like ESO, Elder Scrolls Online, where you can go out to different things to make different sets and stuff like that. Would we have anything like that?
Yeah, most definitely. We'll have a better idea of like just how many and like where exactly in the world as it kind of comes online, and leaving some design space to have some fun. And you won't be able to hide in towns just around your crafting stations to make like the best stuff or the most exotic stuff. And it's funny you mentioned ESO. I actually really love a lot about that game. Not so much the combat side of things, but everything else.
Yeah, me too, man. I can safely say I do as well. It's a bit of fun. Combat, but the rest of it, the immersion, the crafting, and a lot of other stuff, it's pretty fun. It's done really well.
I made the mistake of playing on PS4 though.
No.
I see everyone else I know is on PC. Well, no, like before everyone throws tomatoes and stuff at me, just hear me out. Like, we spend so much time, especially as like a game developer, at my computer. The last thing I want to do when I'm off work is like sit at my computer for more hours. Anything I can do to like sit on the couch or get up and like go do something elsewhere, I generally try to do it. Maybe it's just my age showing. I don't know.
No, that's all right. That's understandable. I'll let you go. Just this once.
Thanks.
All right. So if some trade skills can be done use? I'm guessing that some trade skills can only be done in a city or other static locations. So, like obviously blacksmithing, you're not going to carry a forge around. Are you considering making all of them require a static station, or can some be done using a portable station?
Yeah. We aren't currently planning for portable stations, but I wouldn't rule it out like long term. It's got some interesting like possibilities there, I think, especially for something like provisioning or alchemy. Like that would probably make the most sense. Certainly, there could be a penalty for the flexibility of crafting on the go. I'd probably explore that more, like when we maybe get around to the point of considering that. I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not currently in the pipe.
Yeah, cool. So will every recipe for every trade skill require some component only obtained by purchasing it from an NPC, as in like a good money sink, or will there be other methods?
I don't know that I necessarily see every recipe requiring an item from a vendor in order to craft it. It could certainly be a decent money sink, but my experience playing games where, buying an item from the merchant every time you want to craft, it tends to be like at best either a minuscule drain or at worst an annoyance because I ran out of the specific widget that I needed to have, so I'm continually running back and forth to the NPCs. Some crafts may require specific items from vendors. Like we could certainly do that. Maybe there's an old crafter somewhere that he's unwilling to train you with the knowledge of how to make a particular thing, but they're happy to sell you theirs so you can go make that sweet item you're after.
Okay.
Those cases would likely be like bigger money sinks at a go, and just occur like less frequently.
Yeah, cool. And this, I don't know if we can answer this more about economy, but what are our expected loss rates on selling items back to NPCs when all of the components are purchased from that NPC? So if you buy 1 GP of items and the final items sell for only 1 SP, for example.
Yeah, I think maybe as a general approach, items selling to a vendor for like 1/10 of their asking price is maybe a good starting point, maybe 1/12. That way we can allow some room for like faction and charisma to modify that to somewhat close the gap to like 1/10 or 1/9 of the cost. Whatever like rates we end up with, we certainly don't want to create a situation where like an individual item or a crafted item, like finished item, ends up selling back to the NPCs for a profit. I remember hearing in the GM pit early on working at SOE some tale about like one of the jewel crafting recipes, I think it was, like a particular bracer that sold back to the vendor for a gross profit. Like it was just one of those items the developers had missed.
Yeah.
And yeah, we got to be very careful we don't introduce something like that. So again, good logging, keeping an active hand and eye on the wheel will help catch those. We're only human. We might introduce a mistake, but people knew what they were doing with that for years. Why didn't they speak up?
Yeah, that's it. So this is a follow-up question from previously. It sounds like the design is still very much evolving as we go. Obviously, tester feedback during PA5 and any further PA phases is going to be very important for the mechanical parts of the system, but the nature of PA doesn't lend itself to getting really good economic data. What expectations would you want to set with people who may not be testing until alpha in regards to crafting harvesting? So this is from Discord. This is a follow-up from Neff, just on one of the other ones. So whatever we can kind of say to this.
Yeah. Obviously, tester feedback during PA5 and PA6 will be very important mechanical parts of the system, but the nature of PA doesn't lend itself to getting really good economic data. What expectations would I want to set with people who may not be testing until alpha? Mostly, I think we were going to be concerned with like functionality testing. Like, does it perform as expected? Does the does it just generally feel like achievable? Like you have a goal and you feel like you can go out and do that like in a respectable amount of time? Do you feel like, for my mind, I always go back to like a 2-hour gameplay loop, like thinking of things in that term. Like, what can I do that's going to keep me active and engaged for upwards of 2 hours at a go? So, like, do the mechanics fit that? Like, does it feel good? Do I feel like I'm able to go out and get the things that I need? Am I able to make the things that I want? Can I set achievable goals in that period? And that's kind of more, I think, what I'd be looking at from the system. And does it feel like the flow, like general flow of like the money that I'm receiving or the items that I'm making? Like, does it feel impactful? I'm not worried as much about the raw numbers at that point. We will need a certain amount of player velocity to determine, like, are we on the right track economically? But as far as the mechanical parts, yeah, just does it feel good?
Yeah, cool, man.
That's the kind of stuff I would want in PA5 and other like PA sessions before we open the gates further.
Absolutely. Because, and look, going just on that, alpha is going to be a big step up. A lot more people coming in, a lot more. So we need to be ready for that, and we've got to have the game in a ready state to be able to handle those numbers and for us to be able to collect that data. So that's why it takes a little bit of time to get through.
Yeah, and be able to actually react to it. And,
that's right, yeah, not just be flooded with all this information and just go, oh crap, what do we do? We've got too much to work on, not enough time, too many people.
I'm stocking up my coffee now.
Yeah. And the information is just going to keep coming. There's no break. Like, I don't think people understand when we open a testing server, even for PA5 or PA, whatever, it's all hands on deck. Like, development stops. We're literally got devs, running through the night. We've got people around the world, luckily, so we can do shifts like that. But, even I GM until 2, 3 in the morning sometimes for shifts to help out. We've got other guys and devs, Kurt, looking at the servers. Like, it's a all hands on kind of job. So,
yeah, that's the great thing about working on like this project. Sorry not to talk over you.
No, that's fine, man.
It's just we all wear a lot of hats, and we all very much believe in the product we're making, and it's not very often that you get to work on a project like this anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we certainly all feel that, and as frustrating as it might be to like have to pause things for a few days while we collect the data and we're actively monitoring things. It's also a really exciting time. It's good to see the feedback and kind of get a gut check on like, is this actually playing out like we expected it would?
Exactly. And I only bring that up because there's been a little bit lately after the newsletter just asking about the next PA and how many more until alpha. So while we can't go into hard numbers and dates and times, it's a little bean of how complex it is and how much we have to work for it, and it does delay development. So we want to make sure everything is in there and ready to go for testing before we actually open it up, so we're all set up and ready to go to collect that data, to do what we need to do with it, to fix it, to make changes, however we need to go about doing that.
Absolutely. And if anything that we're talking about here tonight sounds maybe a little like wishy-washy or whatever, it's not because we don't have like a clear direction we'd like to go. I have a generally strong like idea of where I want to steer things, but all of it's just going to come down to like what resources we have available to us, the time that we have available to us, how the testing cycles go, because it's the reality is the team's only so big. Like, we have to be very mindful of scope and what we can achieve by launch. And some of these things may not make it for that exactly, but there's that's the great thing about working on a live product. We don't have to like ship a gold mastered version of the game and that's it. Like, so that's
exactly. We release the best possible product we can, and then we continue to build on it for years to come with the help of our community. So that's what we're kind of aiming for.
Indeed.
All right. So no more beans. Back to crafting.
Yeah, back on track.
Will there be harvesting collections, aka shinies, as seen in EQ2?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about it in concrete terms, in terms of like collection items that we've seen in other games. But I think I can say it's on our radar for consideration. That might fall more under the purview of perception to my mind. But I think there's room for such a thing in any event, like if the rewards from it can feed back into the game in a meaningful way. EQ2s, for example, like their shiny rewards were largely housing items, if I remember correctly. We don't really currently have any plans for a solid timeline for adding a feature like that for Pantheon, but you never know what the future could hold, right? Like,
yeah, that's it. Never say never. All right, so back in April 2017, we said keep an eye open for upcoming info regarding the motions required to craft work orders, recipes, and experimentation. By now, do we have any more information that we can provide regarding those things?
Yeah, Jesus, 2017.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, where's the time gone? Earlier I mentioned writs, which touches a little bit on the work order part. Like the two terms are fairly interchangeable in terms of language there. Giving players incentive beyond just grinding skill points and XP. I want writs to be the avenue that players can influence goods on nearby vendors, being able to buff nearby players and allied NPCs associated with the writ giver. Recipes now, they're just kind of free form as far as like they could come from scrolls, they could probably be trained. If there's a reality in which we were to like go down the path with like the point buy like alternate advancement style system, they'd probably be unlocked like your basic recipes through the point buy directly. So like if you bought into the iron tier, you'd automatically have the iron stuff as a blacksmith. Otherwise, those like basic bread and butter would probably be unlocked or trainable from vendors as you level. They're just, I'm just talking about the bread and butter recipes here specifically, the ones most commonly required for like writs or events. The other recipes, like parts of the horizontal progression, where you're going to see more of the sweet sauce, will probably be rewarded like through quest completion. Some might have tie-ins with perception. Some might exist as tradable like rare adventuring drops. Some might emerge from scavenging or salvaging only. Experimentation may eventually exist. It would probably be more of like a time, item, and money investment in the form of research. So you could have a chance like studying maybe a certain number of an item, like breaking them apart over a period of time to understand, you know, the nuance in it, and that might unlock some new knowledge. Could be taking a new item, altering an existing item to form its own identity, you know, learning certain styles of crafting. It's probably the most mutable part of the system right now. But yeah, thanks again for the interview, Baz. That was a good time. We should do it again sometime soon. But or other players for that matter too, if you're out there listening. Anyway, yeah, I think that covers it. But yeah, I'm certainly open to follow-ups and stuff on this. So
yeah, cool. All right, so we've got about a few minutes left. In the interest of time, we'll quickly just get through this last couple of questions and just see if anyone's got any at the end. Flipping down. So, will different races have distinctive cuisines? So, if so, what can we share with what the differences will be? Added bonuses, some fun food recipe names, etc.
Cuisine will likely be somewhat different culture to culture. Most likely to come down to like ingredients being different, and the resulting dishes having their own flavor, if I can use the pun. You can tell a lot about a culture based off what they eat, I think, and it would be a real missed opportunity not to do that in Pantheon, especially if we're creating like a believable, fantastical, though it may be, world. Earlier in the provisioning levels, expect that you'll be learning similar things regardless of your starting areas. I mean, I think it just kind of like goes back to, you know, before you bake, you kind of learn fundamentals in real life, or before you like, I don't know, make a roux, like, or before you make a dish that uses a roux, you need to learn how to make the roux, that kind of stuff. So it goes for all professions too, like additional layering in of cultures, the higher up you go in crafting levels. Alchemy possibly being the exception by and large. The process around potion and poison making will largely probably be similar area to area, but some cultures may have a few like specific things in their potion cabinets. Different dishes will definitely eventually provide different effects. So if you're looking for a particular combo of stats, there's a provisioner out there probably that has that recipe ready to whip up a batch of whatever you want to eat or drink. Sort of a side note, the effects of food and drink like is still probably one area that we need to improve. Right now, they mostly just kind of add to your regeneration, like out of combat. We need to probably transition that into something more meaningful, like buffs that you know, persist for a period of time, or you die, one or the other, like whichever happens first. Yeah. As far as, I think there's another part of this added bonus, some fun food recipe names. Well, I won't go into too many specifics. I've already pulled a few suggestions from the various threads that people have been suggesting, so please keep the suggestions coming. But there's some infamous fried cheese curds out there, and something to do with pickles, I've heard, so.
Pickles. Solitude. All right, so last two questions. Can we share any insight on how the game tenets have helped shape particular aspects of the intended design behind the crafting and harvesting spheres?
Yeah, so it might be helpful here to talk a little bit about maybe just my overall goals of crafting and harvesting. Regardless of the implementation details, like these are the things I consider when I think about the systems. It may not speak exactly to the heart of like what you're asking, but it should provide some insight like into the thought process. Whatever we do has to be somewhat approachable. It has to be intuitive, like easy to jump in and be able to kind of understand it. You don't have to know, like master it, but being able to just approach it, not being scared off. It doesn't have to mean simple though. Like I want to be clear on that. There's a reason that only like a very small percentage of players in Vanguard ever achieved like a meaningful crafting level. It was a great system for those that could understand it, but man, was that learning curve steep.
Oh yeah.
And some of that was, the technology at the time. Like the devs at the time did their best with, I think, the technology they had to try and convey something so complex with the means that they had. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent here. So the items also, like, and crafting and harvesting itself has to be desirable. Like, it should have an effect on the larger world in a meaningful way. Items made through crafting should share space with and complement at times, the best adventuring items. Whatever crafters make has to have its own item identity. They should follow similar constraints of the adventuring items, and that's one thing that we want. We want those like fabled items that you kind of know at a glance, or like that you're chasing, like your Cloak of Flames or your Mithril Two-Hander, and insert whatever item here that you really remember. Like, we want those moments in crafting too.
Absolutely.
We want to avoid complete obsolescence, so we don't want materials to completely fall off in use. Like, new materials and recipes call back to include the original game's materials. That goes for as we make expansions or add content to the game. And piggybacking on that, the old materials would show up in new areas. We also want to try to negate inflation as much as possible. Regular, keeping a hand gently on the pulse of the economy and be willing to step in and make adjustments where we need to, whether it's like adjusting drop rates or whether it's adjusting sell rates or kind of mimicking a supply and demand thing. If we notice like a particular material's in huge supply and it's not being spent for whatever reason, it's hoarding and people have no value with it, finding ways to meaningfully encourage people to part ways with it. Leveraging other existing systems where possible to complement crafting and harvesting. It shouldn't require other systems for the core progression, however. So what I'm talking about here is like, it's best when it complements, but isn't necessarily like inherently a requirement to meaningfully move forward as a crafter or harvester. Giving players opportunities to utilize a system that doesn't rely on simply making things. That kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with being able to interact in the world in just a meaningful way beyond like, the swords I make or the potions I whip up or the wood I whittle and all that stuff.
Yeah, nice. They're joking. They think they like it when you talk fast because they don't think I can keep up and catch enough beans. But
that's so.
Corey's doing.
I'm just trying to get through as many questions as possible. I'm sorry.
No, man, this is all recorded. They can go back and listen to this and pause it and do whatever they want. There's lots of good stuff.
I'm sure.
And they're
going to bump it down to like quarter speed and
yeah. And I want you to have free reign, man. Like, this is really good stuff. I've been a crafter myself. I'm letting some beans come through. Corey's good. He knows what we can and can't say as well. So it's just great information that's been thought out and shared with you guys. So we have one more question before we wrap it up. We're like a minute away. We might be able to do a couple of live ones at the end if the guys are very quick. But the last one is there any plan to implement a high-quality system where crafters have a chance to produce an upgraded version of what they are trying to make? If so, can we share any insight on how this could be accomplished? So like resource quality, crafter skill, crafting station, minigame, RNG, etc.
Yeah, of course. I would love to implement a chance to get a free upgraded version of a finished item when it's crafted. I think I touched on that a little earlier in the discussion, but to my mind, the implementation would include subcomponent quality and crafter skill first as those that would feed into the completion of the intended item in the session. If we elect to include the point by progression that I mentioned earlier, I would also likely want to look at that to contribute to the chance of getting a free upgrade. I'd also note that these three areas could also contribute to less materials consumed once the item is made. So you may find yourself with some extra scraps left over. Sort of like when I make furniture, like if I go to IKEA and I bring something home and I'm putting it together, I have extra parts over. I just made it more efficiently, right? Like that's how that works.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. As long as it's still
at least that's what I
spelled.
tell myself. Yeah, that's how I sleep at night. But of the things you mentioned, like in the question here, a wholly separate mini game or requiring a specific crafting station to get just like a free upgrade probably wouldn't apply.
Yeah, cool. All right, that's perfect. Thank you very much, man. So
no lightning round. Aww.
We're on time, but I'll give you guys 5 minutes. If you've got any questions that you want that aren't too long to answer and you want to spit them out right now, do so please. Tag myself or Corey, and we'll answer the first couple that pop up.
One thing I can touch on that I saw scroll past earlier was a question about item like component and ingredient weights. There's no plan really right now to go like that deep on immersion. Like we want the progression, like what you get out of it to be meaningful. I think it's a little perhaps overly punishing to expect that players are going to have possibly hundreds of items scattered through their inventory and like crawl to the machines or the stations rather. Like, so that's one I can touch on real quick. Favorite crafting game as a player, not a dev. Probably ESO right now. Sorry. Okay, thanks.
Oh yeah. So what about stack limits? This is from me as a crafter.
Stack limits. I think we're gonna stick to some sensible, stack limits, but we're exploring the idea of like an expanded crafting bag that would house your materials, so you wouldn't have to be expected to fight for space with like your adventuring stuff too hard. We don't want it to be just like endless, but yeah, we've already talked about trying to work that in if possible.
Awesome, good stuff.
All right, I made somebody's man crush list. Sweet.
You made
Blacksmiths
it
mend out in the world, if that will be a system. If we include repairing, I think it absolutely makes sense to allow crafters to be able to feed into that. Will gear consumables have level requirements? Whatever like level or like sort of equipment restrictions we have in adventuring gear, crafting will also follow the same pattern to my mind. How many of you devs play on 99? Most of us have either dipped our toes into it or played actively, especially like when we were in the early stages of development. I don't know that any of us really have time right now to do that, and those that do are probably dipping in and out of that other monstrosity right now that just came out that we're not going to speak of. But yeah, as looking at classic designs, of course, we're keeping an eye on what's going on over there. Anything? Let's see. Do we have time for anything else? We've still got 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes. Anything else, guys? Nice and quick before we wrap up.
Planned approach expansions, traditional expansions where new continents, planets, planes offer all the content while abandoning the old world. No, I don't. I mean, of course, we're going to, if we're successful, we're going to add content. Like, I don't think that it's right to just like ignore the world back there. But the other thing to keep in mind is if we open new areas and we're designing for that, if we're also planning for the old world, that means kind of like twice the load in terms of what we have to account for. And that's not to say that it's not a good idea to do those things. It's just it kind of makes scope and like internal accounting that much more difficult. I think we're up for the challenge. I think we can do it. I would like to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We just things like that. Like we've got huge vision, but we also like to keep ourselves accountable and realistic what we can actually put in. But we will still. That's not going to stop us from going for those pipe dreams and working hard towards them and seeing how far we can get.
Of course, shoot for the sky.
That's it.
Trade routes. Local trading happens. Do you mean like caravan routes, like wandering vendors, or could you explain a little bit? Gotta be quick.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, though.
Caravans. Like NPC or player caravans? Both. I don't know that we have like plans specifically, like concretely as far as like player, like physical caravans in that manner go. I certainly think that there's room to make like NPC ones that travel in that manner, though. Like you might have visiting merchants. That's definitely in the plans. Whether they, that's a case of like, oh, reset happened and this week this NPC is here, or it's a case of like you can actually track them and follow them through the world. I think a lot of it's going to depend on like crossing crossing like chunk lines or zone lines. Things can get a little wonky doing that kind of stuff. So we'll see. I certainly wouldn't be against it.
All right. And for the last question, finish up on a high, was where is it? Oh, he said, how exciting is it working on a game that's going to be saving the genre? I don't know about saving the genre, but working on this game is amazing. I can speak for myself.
Yeah, it's like I touched on for about like 10 minutes ago or so. It's just such a real treat. Like a lot of people aren't willing to try and make this type of game. It's got its own. It's such a rarity, and it's such a treat to be working on it and be working with people that are so passionate and excited to do it. And it's, I don't know. I wish we'd been making a documentary about this on the back end for you guys to see, so you could just kind of see the amount of work and passion that goes into it. We should have been doing that, but
yeah, that's missed opportunity.
If I ever get, sorry, dogs are barking. If I ever get a time machine, I know what I'm doing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Corey. I really appreciate you coming on, mate. It's great information as always. Thank you to everybody who turned up to listen. We appreciate the support, guys. I know it's late for some of you, and you guys have put a few things off for this, so muchly appreciated. This will go up live pretty much straight after this. I'll upload it straight away onto YouTube, and then I'll post it in the VIP section for you guys and the champions, and then a week later it goes out to everyone. Please keep this thread going. If you've got any follow-up questions or anything you want to pick Corey's brain, Corey and myself will both be looking at this thread over the next week or so feel free to jump in. We may get enough information from that to do another one at a later stage, so yeah, and keep those ideas coming for Corey for the food items and recipes and anything you've got. We both scour the crafting section as well, so that's all being absorbed and passed on to the right people and giving Corey ideas, so please keep that coming. And thank you very much, guys. We love doing these. We love having you on, and I just want to say thank you again to Corey. It's been a pleasure, mate.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you everyone for your wonderful questions and for caring about this. Maybe again, it's just my age, but the older I get, I really appreciate a lot of the non-combat things that games bring to the table, and I'm really excited to be working on this because of that, and to have the opportunity to do it. Your passion, really kind of drives me as well, and it drives all the rest of the team. Like we definitely wouldn't be doing this if you guys weren't behind us, cheering us on and supporting us, and being the best allies that you are. So thank you very much, and I look forward to doing it again soon. I know kind of like publicly on the forums and stuff, I'm not the most vocal. I like to kind of take a backseat approach and let people work through conversations, and I don't want to sometimes show up with an opinion or a design goal and have the conversation stop. So don't take my silence at times as me not caring or not reading. I'm definitely watching, and I look forward to hearing more from you.
Thanks heaps, guys. We'll see you next month.
Cheers, guys.